Finally today, new data shows the national office vacancy rate is 13%. That's the highest it's been since the mid-1990s, as more Australians now choose to work from home. So could vacant buildings in the CBD be part of the solution to Australia's housing crisis? Here's reporter David Taylor.
It's a lonely Friday morning walk to his Sydney CBD office for funds manager Steve Johnson.
I'm walking into the city on a Friday morning this morning, and it's a ghost town here in Sydney.
The Australian Property Council monitors the use of office space. Its latest report shows the national CBD vacancy rate increased from 12.8% to a multi-decade high of 13.5%. Steve Johnson expects the office vacancy rate to climb higher.
It's going up by the month because there are completions still coming into the market, and as companies' leases expire, they are taking on less and less space. So this trend has certainly not peaked yet. 2024 is going to be a big year for more completions, and I think you're going to see companies further shrink their floor space. So we're not at the end of that process yet. This is a coming crisis. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Steve Johnson says the extent of the crisis will depend on how many bosses can encourage their workers back to the office. Erin Devlin runs People2People Recruitment Victoria and is involved in contract negotiations between workers and their bosses. She says workers have the upper hand right now in choosing to work from home because the labour market remains tight.
Candidates are still wanting to have that flexibility and that option to work from home. I think that in Australia, we're seeing different working from home levels in different states, particularly the states with the prolonged lockdowns during COVID that became more used to those working from home practices, such as Victoria, for example. We're seeing it's much harder for employers to shift back to getting people back in the office. People are typically wanting flexibility in their work environments, and it's going to depend on how in-demand candidates are. We're still in a really tight labour market at the moment, and so employers do need to offer really good flexibility if they want to attract great people to their business.
And the law may be shifting in favour of workers too. As part of the next stage to industrial relations changes, Labor and the Greens are looking at the idea of introducing a legislated right for workers to disconnect. In other words, legal protection for you as a worker to ignore calls from work if it's outside work hours, potentially making working from home more manageable. Green Senator Barbara Pocock is pushing for this reform.
So that it's a reasonable, the employer can certainly contact in reasonable circumstances. You know, if there's a need for a wellbeing check, if there's a need to change an arrangement around work, those kinds of things seem very reasonable. And there are, the employee also, of course, at times will need to be responsive where those requests are reasonable. So we're looking at a common sense approach that's flexible and adapting to local circumstances, industry by industry.
And if fewer workers are returning to CBDs across the country, can the vacant space be turned into affordable housing? Steve Johnson is confident it can.
A conversion process here that needs to happen from office to residential and to industrial that's going to take some time. I'm actually quite excited about what it can do for CBD districts over a 10 and 15 year period as more of it becomes a living city rather than just a working city. I think that's quite exciting in terms of what it can do, particularly for the Sydney CBD. I think Melbourne's already had quite a bit of that.
That's a funds manager, Steve Johnson there, ending that report from David Taylor.